Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Morrison. I am the CEO of Quadrant Research and the project lead for the National Arts Education Data Project. And welcome to today's session, our first session of four that will be focusing in on data literacy and its applications into the area of arts education. This session is part of a series of professional development sessions, as well as research that we're doing in conjunction with our good folks over at OSPI, particularly working closely with Janet and her team there. And this has been a conversation that has been going on actually for several years. We started having conversations with Janet, I think more than 2 years ago, and actually ended up with an agreement in place where we were going to start doing some work. And then there was some issues and concerns about data quality, and then some other questions came up. And so long story short, we're finally to the place where later this month, we will be releasing the first set of dashboards that will highlight the status and condition of arts education, K-12 across Washington State. And it will include information regarding teachers. It's actually the first state that we've worked with where we're creating a special dashboard that's focused on teachers, their certification, their longevity in the system, so that we can get a better understanding, and you all can have a better understanding of who's providing the instruction in arts education across the state, in addition to all the other great information that we'll have regarding who has access, who doesn't, who's participating, and what does it look like in those communities or those schools where arts education is not provided, and what are the attributes of those schools, so we can see if there's any themes that emerge that will inform the work of our ArtsEd Washington, as well as all of you in your own communities. So this is really the very beginning of the lead up to the launch of the dashboards, the release of the data, and hopefully a new era of data-informed advocacy and decision-making, so that folks in Washington can work to ensure that every child has access to the benefits that occur when they have the opportunity to engage meaningfully in the arts as part of their regular school day, a part of the regular curriculum. So that's what we're all striving for. And I think that the tools that we will provide are just that, tools, that you can use to hopefully help you get to that end. But to start, we're doing the sessions regarding data literacy because it became clear to us over the years of running the Arts Education Data Project, and we're operating now in 31 states, that there is a need for additional training and helping our arts educators and our arts administrators understand how to look at the data, how to be able to look at data critically, how to know and recognize when data is being misrepresented. And so with us today is Dr. Jen Shephard. Jen is our Director of Data Visualization for the Arts Education Data Project and working with us at Quadrant Research. She's also been leading a lot of our professional learning that she's done for our other states, as well as some other sessions that she's done recently, including I think she did a Title IV conference recently in the state of Arizona, focusing on data literacy in general terms, not as it relates to arts education, but as it relates to just education in general. So Jen will be leading all of the sessions over the next 4 weeks, and you are going to be in fantastic hands, but you're going to have to roll up your sleeves because this is going to be interactive. There will be some work. And then following all of these sessions, then we will also be scheduling another session later on in the summer once the dashboards are released, so that we can all do a really deep dive into the dashboards and share with you how to utilize them, some of the tricks that are there, some of the things that may not be as obvious as one would like, but to make sure that everyone in the state can understand how to use the tool to maximum benefit. So with that, I am going to turn the the microphone and the session over to Dr. Jen Shephard. So Jen, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. So glad to be here and meet you all and start talking about data in general, but specifically the Washington data as we get closer and closer to launching your dashboards, as Bob just said. So let me go ahead and share my screen here and we can start talking about today's topic. So can somebody please confirm that you're seeing my screen there? Thank you. Okay, perfect. So this is session 1 of 4. This was really meant to be a very basic introduction. We work, as Bob said, with a lot of people over the years, some of whom do have some comfort and familiarity with data, and some who their experience with data is more limited. Maybe it's been a while since they were formally trained with data. And so we just like to make sure we start at a basic level of talking about what is data, where do we get data, a little bit of some of the descriptive terms of data. And then towards the end of the session, I'll make sure to talk about some of the specific things that are important concepts as it relates to the arts education data project in particular. But before we get into all of that, I want to get to know you a little bit better. We're going to be spending 4 sessions together. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself, let me know which organization you're with. And what I'd really like to hear about is what you're hoping to get out of this 4-part series. Would it be helpful for me to call on folks, or do you want to just chime in?
Maybe call on us.
Okay. Like some of your names I can't actually see on your display though. So maybe Jody can help out with that. I do see a Liz.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz. I use she, her pronouns. And boy, my organizations. I am a very long-standing arts educator, mostly in the state of Massachusetts, and was a teacher for a few years here in Washington as well. I'm not doing that currently because I am a grant writer and fundraiser for ArtsEd Washington. I am also newly the interim executive director of the Rude Mechanicals Theater Company out here in Tri-Cities. We produce free Shakespeare and Shakespeare-related productions. And so I'm just getting started with that particular role. Lastly, I am also working for and involved in Mid-Columbia libraries out here in the Tri-Cities. So those are my organizations. I am deeply interested in resources allocated to arts education. I have kiddos in my home who are involved in the arts and see what wonders their educators are doing. And I'm also interested in how to leverage this sort of data to also help push into spaces that are sort of non-traditional educational spaces. So I'm interested in the public K-12 sphere, but I'm also interested in what some of this data says about arts education for all learners in all spaces, how to kind of push out the boundaries of how we talk about it. That's me.
Very interesting. I'm going to have to update my slide then to say organizations plural, given all your affiliations. And Renee?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I am the retired program supervisor for the arts from OSPI in 2011. So there, Ann Banks followed me, and now Janet has followed me. So it's been a while. And currently the CEO of More Arts LLC. It's my own company. And my interest in this presentation is that I am the educational and research consultant for that organization and do a lot of research. We conducted 5 surveys, qualitative surveys during COVID with the Washington Art Education Association, and have been publishing that information. So I'm interested in everything that you have to say, Jen and Bob, about this and what you do to help people understand data, because it really is hard to understand, and also the pitfalls of sharing data. I also wanted to share that, of course, I was a founding member of CDA, and Bob has worked with CDA and done a lot of research. And so just really happy that you're doing this research in Washington State. We've been trying to get these numbers since I started in 2001. It'll be interesting to see how you do that with how the certification requirements. So like I was a principal, but I was still an arts educator, and they qualified me as a principal because that's where they got the money. And so there are a lot of that discrepancy. We could never tell who was what. And some of us taught all of the arts. And so which art did we get classified under? So it wasn't real clear data. There are a lot more of us than have ever been reported. So it'll be interesting to see what you found. So I'm just here to learn. I'm a learner and I'm going to take copious notes, and I know I'm going to listen to the recordings too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Glad to have you.
Odette.
Thank you.
My name isn't on there because I'm logged in through the ArtsEd Zoom. Sorry about that. I'm Odette. I work with ArtsEd Washington as their operations coordinator. So that's one of my organizations. And then I'm also a professional muralist and I run my own business. So that's my other organization of me. But what I'm hoping to get out of this, first of all, I really want to learn how to effectively communicate about data. It's something that can be skewed very easily. People tend to share it with an agenda, all of that stuff. And I want to make sure that we are sharing it and using it in a way that's transparent, that's honest, that's actually representative, and that supports our goals, that supports our wish to supports teachers and students and other members of arts organizations. So I want to understand what I'm saying, and I want to be able to use it really effectively. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's definitely one of our goals for you all as well, because I think that is one of the big challenges, is all the ways you can explain data doesn't necessarily mean it's a good way to explain the data, or a way that someone's going to take from it what you wanted them to take from it. So that's not today's session, but we'll get to that in the series. So really glad to hear you're looking forward to that. Jody, did you want to say something about yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm executive director of ArtsEd Washington and also owner and founder of Luminous Minds Project, where I work with youth from adverse childhood experiences, learning how to grow, heal, and learn through the arts, and also promote trauma-informed spaces. So I'm just really excited about this data workshop and to learn about building data literacy. I don't think I've ever taken a course around how to build data literacy. I've always read it and tried to intuit it and tried to figure it out, but having something concrete that I can also share with our community in a way that builds a story, and understanding the data story that's being created here in Washington State, and to understand why there is such a huge gap between 14 years is a big time not to have data, and how we could possibly have not better, but more reoccurring data moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And echoing everything everybody said too, for sure.
Yeah, this is really great. So it sounds like, let me go ahead and shift here. So these are the 4 sessions that we'll be covering in total. So today, like I said, pretty basic terminology, understanding of data. Then we'll just talk about data visualization in our next session, some more common chart and graph types, how to interpret them, when is an appropriate time to use them. Third session is all about this project and looking at the different types of charts that we use in the project and some of the things we can and cannot say with the data that we have for the project. And then the 4th session is about that critical thinking, critical sharing piece, and some things to be on the lookout for. So I'm really excited about with you all in particular is that it sounds like that not only are you interested in learning for your own sake, it sounds like some of you will have the opportunity to share some of these concepts with other people. And so even if some of this is something that you already know, great. There's nothing wrong with confirming knowledge that you already have or reaffirming your confidence in your understanding, but then also hopefully it will be helpful to you as you talk with other people who maybe aren't part of these sessions. So I'm really looking forward to this, and let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start with this quote because I think it's important to realize and kind of set the stage for the series that we're not really going to be doing analyses and looking at data in terms of all the ways you can calculate with it. Of course, data literacy and data do involve those steps, but really our focus with this project and this series in particular is about how data literacy is really about an everyday life skill. Data are in so many things in so many places and so many aspects of our lives, certainly professionally, as you all just given all of your various affiliations and the ways that you can and will be using data, but also even just in our personal lives, decisions, whether to refinance your home or where to put your money for your retirement account. There's lots of ways that we need to be good consumers of data. And so having these skills will help us in a lot of different areas. It's not just about the ability to do analyses with data, it's about understanding that data as well. And again, just to kind of make sure we have some basic fundamentals and shared understandings, I just want to talk a little bit about what do I mean when I say the word data. So I put this definition together from a couple of different places, and I like how it's kind of these two parts. So part one is it's a collection of something, whether you think of that as a fact or information or observation. Data will come in a lot of different forms, but it's this collection of that information, and then we're going to use that in some way. Data just for the sake of data isn't particularly useful. So we really want to make sure we're using that information that somebody's gone to the trouble of collecting in some way to have a discussion about it, or use it to make our decisions, or perhaps do a calculation with it. You'll see a lot of that in the media, things about rates and averages and medians and things like that. So I want to make sure that we don't have data in this project just to have it, that we're talking about it and using it in some way. And when we talk about data, I think most people think numbers immediately, and absolutely that's an important part of data, but data is actually much broader than that. Data can be in text form, it can be descriptive of how people describe various characteristics of people or situations or classes or whatever. It can also come in other formats like audio files and image files. In fact, data can come from all of these different sources and many more. You might not think of an X-ray as a form of data, but it really is. That's how the doctor and the radiologist can get information about what might be going on inside of you. Or photographs, maps, that's another big one that we do use as part of this project. The sources for data for the Arts Education Data Project are really just the top one currently, administrative records. So it's all of the course information about how many students are in a course, which courses are being offered, what was the enrollment number. We hope to get to a place where we're also getting some assessment information. There's a lot of interest from the folks who are part of this project. Would love to be able to see us be able to relate the arts education participation with how the students are actually doing. So whether that's a standardized assessment or just things like their attendance rate, their graduation rate, more of those types of sources, we would love to be able to get there. We aren't currently there yet, so it's really just about the records. But I just wanted to point out some of these other places that data can come from out there in the world. And now talking specifically about some of the skills in working with data, lots of different people talk about data literacy, and lots of people have different thoughts about what does that mean. I really liked these 6 skills in particular. So I'm going to go through each of these briefly with a specific example that relates to education to illustrate what is this skill. So we have location, comprehension, interpretation, analysis, integration, and then communication, which I know some of you mentioned you really want to have more skill in that area. So the location piece is really about finding the relevant data, and it's finding it in 2 specific ways. So the first is you need to figure out where am I even going to get my data from. So it might be identifying which is the most appropriate data dashboard from the Arts Education Data Project to answer this particular question, or it might be here's this really long report that some government entity put out. Which of the many pages or appendices in this report is the right one to get the table or the chart to answer the data question that I have? So source meaning where do I find the data? But then secondly, once I get to that correct table or chart or the one that's best suited for my question, where do I look there? So sometimes people see a chart and maybe they understand a chart in general. Maybe they're not sure with this particular chart, where should they be looking? And so that location skill is really the first step to be able to do anything with the data. You have to know where to look for that data. So here's the example I'm going to keep referring to over the next several minutes here. Imagine a data table like this. Maybe you find this in the appendix of a report, or maybe your school or a school that you are really interested in because of your children or for whatever reason puts out this information annually. And maybe your key question is this one at the top. What is the proportion of the 4th grade girls who have tested as less than proficient? And we can think of testing as maybe it's their math skills or their science skills, or maybe it's proficiency with a musical instrument, however you want to think about that. But let's say they've been assessed formally, and some of the students tested proficient and some didn't. Well, location skill, first we found the table. Now we have to figure out where in this big sea of numbers am I even supposed to look for this? And so we start translating the sentence or our question into the pieces of the table. So 4th grade girls, all right, we need to make sure we're looking at the 4th grade section of the table. The girls, so I want to make sure I'm looking for the females. The proportion, so I want to make sure I'm looking at that percent column. Less than proficient. Now this one actually requires a little bit of information. If you don't already know what proficiency means, you would then need to go look elsewhere to figure out what are these 4 levels of proficiency and how do they relate to each other. So what we're actually looking for are these 2 groups that are above proficient in the table or below it in terms of scoring, the below basic and the basic. And so you put all those pieces together, and then we've successfully located the 2 cells of this table that actually get us to the answer to our question. So you may do this even without even realizing how much you're actually actively working to translate a question into a table. Those of us who have worked with data quite a bit do this pretty naturally and seamlessly, and they don't perhaps even realize that it's a skill that not everybody has, and one that we might need to help people through when they're first encountering a big table of numbers like this. And then that second skill of comprehension, so you find where to look, but what is that actually telling you? What do these numbers mean? So here we might want to not only look at the 2 numbers and add them together to get our 32.4%. There's a little bit of math that we just did there, but also what is the context of this table? If I'm only looking at 63 4th grade students, am I talking about all the 4th grade girls in or the 4th grade students in the state? No, certainly not. Probably not even all the students in a district. Depending on the size of the school, probably not even the whole school. So hopefully, wherever you're sourcing your information from has done a really good job of telling you how the data were obtained, where it was obtained, any exclusions or caveats that you would need to know. But even if none of that was included, or maybe someone just sent you the table, you can still use some of the contextual clues from within it to give you a sense of, if you can't identify which school it is, at least you know this definitely isn't talking about the state as a whole. You're probably talking about a small school or maybe a classroom. So all of those pieces of figuring out not just where to look, but also thinking about what is this number representing, in this case, the student size, that's all part of that comprehension piece as well. So then the third skill here is, what does that actually mean? And why does it matter? Or what is the meaningfulness of this number? So we have that 32.4%. Well, another way of thinking about that is it's almost a third, 33.333 repeating percent. So what does that mean, practically speaking, if almost a third of our 4th grade girls are less than proficient on this particular subject test? That's probably not a great finding. But maybe it's not as bad as it would seem. So then the next skill is really the skill of analysis. And it may involve doing analytics or calculations or math or statistical tests. That could be part of it. But it can also just mean really digging into the data and asking more questions about it, or interrogating that finding to say, well, what are the implications of this? So sometimes a number just by itself isn't super meaningful. You kind of need that context of similar numbers or similar groups or maybe trends over time to really help you understand it. So back to our table here, we might want to start asking questions like, all right, so if just under a third of the 4th grade girls are less than proficient, how did that compare to the 4th grade boys? Or to the 5th grade girls or the 5th grade boys? How did that compare to last year or the year before? How does that compare to the school that's very similar to ours that's in a neighboring district? You can start thinking of all these additional follow-up questions you might have when you see a finding like just under a third of the students or the 4th grade girls were not proficient. And those additional questions, being able to ask those, thinking of those, and identifying what else you might need to know to contextualize this finding, all of that is part of that analysis skill. And so those are some of the things that we'll be modeling throughout this course, is thinking about, we've got a finding, how do we know what that means, or how do we interpret this in the context of what we care about, or what message we're trying to convey, or what we want people to know. And some of that is asking further questions. A lot of the work that we do is about trend analyses and seeing, here's a value for this year. How does that look compared to last year? Do we have a pretty stable finding here, or has something changed dramatically? And then once you do find something like that, of course, the follow-up question is, and why might that be the case? So we'll talk about that in just a minute. The fifth skill then is being able to communicate these results out. So sometimes you might have been tasked with being the one to get the answer to the question and then share that back with your team. Or maybe you're writing a press release or something, and you don't want to just inundate people with a whole bunch of tables and graphs necessarily. You might want to be able to give them the key finding. And so being able to share those insights and communicate that out to others is an important skill, because not everybody maybe has the ability to read the table that you read. You might want to be able to summarize that finding for them. And this really gets to what y'all were saying earlier about wanting to make sure you do that properly and appropriately, and that if you are the one summarizing a data finding, that you do that in such a way that the person who gets your summary does walk away with information instead of misinformation, and has what they need to take further action on that. So one way we might think about this with our example here is you might take those two cells of the table and turn that into a description. So you might say something like this: almost a third of the fourth grade girls, let's assume we had some sort of header or note with our table of where this came from, at Shady Oak Elementary tested as less than proficient in math this year. Although that is better than the rate for the 4th grade boys and the 5th graders, it's worse than last year's rate. So you can see how taking just those 2 cells, turning it into one percentage, and then putting this context around it of how it compares to these other groups, that is what really helps communicate this finding to somebody else. It's not just a number anymore, it's a number with some meaning behind it. And then the 6th skill is, what are we going to do with this information? Remember, back to my definition of data, we have a collection of facts or information, and then we do something with that. We discuss it. We maybe make an evaluation plan around it. We maybe monitor it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make a change. It can just mean, let's keep an eye on this finding and continue to do great, right? Maybe you found something that's a really good result. Doesn't mean you need to do anything differently, but you may just want to make sure you're keeping an eye on that so that you can say that you're continuing to do a good result. So in this particular example, maybe that utility is that we want to keep an eye on things, and maybe we actually want to dig into our curriculum. Maybe our proposal is that perhaps the curriculum is not being portrayed as thoroughly as it needs to be, or maybe not enough time was spent with that curriculum and more time was spent on something else. And so we want to make sure that that coverage is sufficient. Lots of potential action steps that could come out of a finding. This is just one example of one. You, of course, would want to tailor yours to what you think is going on, maybe by obtaining some additional data, and then make that recommendation for that action or the next step. So those are some of the basic skills that, as I was saying, I think are really foundational to having data literacy and being able to work with data effectively. And if you're working with somebody and trying to help them along their data journey, some of it might just be pointing out things they're already doing and might not even realize they have a skill in their area. I think a lot of working with data is being able to have the confidence in it. I think some people are better with data and know more about data than they realize, but they just don't feel comfortable in the area. They don't think of themselves as a data person, or they don't realize how much data literacy they actually have. And so being able to say, you already found the information that you're looking for. That was a great follow-up question. Way to have analysis skill, right? If you can kind of encourage people in that way and help them realize that they're doing some of these things maybe without even realizing it, then a part of being data literate is also having the confidence in that ability, in those abilities as well. So a couple other benefits. This came from a longer list. I'm happy to share with you all later. I just really liked these couple that I want to share with you. So I think one of the things to think about is, if you have skill in data literacy, it makes it so much easier to figure out what is the conclusion here. If you don't have that data literacy skill, you might see a number and you maybe you're not as good at the analysis piece of it, of questioning how does this compare to other years or other groups of students. And so you might not really know, is this a good finding or a bad finding? Is this something we should celebrate or something we need to take action on? And having data literacy is what lets you know what that conclusion really is. And then being able to apply that to your work life and also your personal life. I gave some examples earlier of how data are important to us personally as well. And you can use those same skills in all those different areas of your life. On the other hand, if you don't have these data literacy skills, it can be really difficult to know, what should you be doing next? Do you need to take action on this? Or is this just more of an FYI? Do we need an evaluation of this to keep an eye on our trends? Do we need to put resources towards this because it's such a significant problem that we need to correct it immediately? And then the last piece, we talked about this a little bit earlier, of wanting to make sure that if you're the one relying on information or sharing it with others, that you're doing so with integrity, that the data are something that can be relied upon, that the message people are going to take from information you shared is the right reaction, is the right information. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation out there. Some of it I think is unintentional. People were maybe tasked with putting out a press release or building a chart, and they didn't really know what they were doing, or maybe weren't given clear direction on what the key takeaway was supposed to be. And so sometimes it's just a mistake, but sometimes people want you to believe something in a certain way, and they will give you the data presented in such a way to make you, or I should say, to encourage you to take away the finding they want you to have. I have some great examples of that for our next session, or sorry, for the 4th session on manipulated information. All right, so that was the intro about the skills. So now I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the vocabulary and how do we talk about data when we're talking either with our colleagues, or if we're talking in our personal lives, it could be with our family as well. So I want to talk specifically about some of the types of data. And then very important for this arts education data project is this idea of the granularity of the data. So I have this little image here of this garden growing and these plants growing, because I really love this idea that data literacy isn't that you have it or you don't. It's really something, a skill that we can continually improve and we can all get better at. Some people are just putting seeds in. Some people have a little plant there but need to give it some water or some fertilizer. And some people have a garden already well in bloom, and maybe being able to talk about these skills together and talk about this will just help them get more produce out of their garden or something like that. I like how it's this process and this thing that we can continue to get better at. It's, you haven't arrived, you're not done with data literacy. You're always working towards having more of those skills and more of the confidence. So I mentioned data types. There are really these two classes of data. So I think one of you, I'm sorry, I forget who it was, mentioned qualitative data earlier. So that's one of the key ones. We have quantitative data, thank you, Anne Renee. So quantitative data are data that are expressed numerically, and it's usually in response to questions like you see at the bottom here. How much of something, how many, how often, when, and you get a number back as an answer. So in terms of arts education, an example of this might be, how many courses did Renee take last semester? Or how many instruments does Laura play? Maybe Laura plays no instruments. Maybe Laura plays 7 instruments. She's an absolute prodigy and amazing musically. It's a number, a numeric answer. On the other hand, we have qualitative data, which are describing data with words. So it's usually answering questions like, what happened? Why did something happen? So you might see a trend where maybe you're trucking along for years with a nice steady number of enrollments in your arts programs, and then suddenly there's a big drop. Well, certainly everybody who sees that is going to wonder, why did we have this big change in enrollment? Or maybe your number of arts teachers plummeted in a certain year. Of course, you're going to want to know why that happened. And being able to describe those trends in words is a qualitative, is explaining the data qualitatively. So let's do a little activity together here. I have 4 questions for you. I just want you to tell me whether the answer to this question would be a quantitative response or qualitative data. So how many students are in both concert band and in jazz band? You can feel free to, since it's just a small group especially, feel free to just go ahead and call that out.
It's quantitative. How many?
How many number? Yep, exactly right. So the number might be 50 or 100 or whatever that number might be. How about the second one? Where did Dr. Martin get his teaching degree?
Qualitative?
Mm-hmm. Qualitative. So you would probably answer with an institution, like University of Washington or someplace where he went to school. Just trying to make sure I got the chat here too. Third one, which school does Mark attend?
Qualitative.
Right, also qualitative. It's going to be words answered. Again, the name of a school probably. How about this fourth one? How much does Rena like drawing?
I'm going to say that's quantitative because it can be expressed in a percentage or in numbers. Rena likes drawing 8 hours a day or 2 hours a day or 3 minutes a day. You know, all of those are numbers.
They are. It could be quantitative. Absolutely.
Or those scaling questions like disagree, much agree, 1 through 5. Could be.
Could be. Exactly right. This one, I don't want to say it's a tricky one, but this is an illustration of how certain question types don't always lead to a certain type of data, because it depends on how you phrase the question or what response options you give somebody. If you just said, how much to leave it open-ended, how much does she like drawing? You might get an answer like, it's her favorite thing. She likes it a lot. That's very qualitative. Which if you said on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is not very much and 10 is a lot, how much does she like to draw? That's obviously quantitative. So you can adjust the way you ask the question or the type of responses you get in order to get a different type of information back as your answer. It's not a hard and fast rule that the how much question is always a quantitative type of data. It really can depend. Very good.
Depending on the type of test, like, do I need hard numbers about how many students like drawing more than an hour a day? Or do I need qualitative data? We're talking about the social, mental, emotional experience of the students. How do they feel about the art? Like, it's that sort of division of what data you're seeking.
Yes, right. What are you hoping to do with the information? Back to our definition of data. And based on that, which way of collecting this will get me to that goal more effectively? If you need to quantify it and say X% of students like drawing, then yeah, you probably would want a quantitative number. If it's about the subjective experience of the students in the class, maybe you want to ask something a little more qualitative. So yeah, the way you choose to ask the question can absolutely and probably should be informed by what you hope to do with that information once you get it back. And it's definitely easier to do that as you're asking the questions, as opposed to you get your information back and then you've got to figure out how you're going to change what you got into what you're supposed to be reporting on. So it's really nice if you know those goals ahead of time.
Yeah, I feel like this must be a problem with a lot of data seeking, where they're like, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to ask for the data. And now I got a lot of data and I don't know how to interpret it because I wasn't clear on my goals when I started seeking the data.
Yes, I think that happens more often than we would hope. That someone just throws a survey together or, pulls the information out of the way it was kept in the record system, and then you've got what you've got to work with, and it's maybe not would have been what you would have liked if you've been able to design it from the get-go. Yes. Okay. Qualitative data, so the descriptive words version, can also be further broken down into these two types of qualitative data. So nominal data doesn't have any sort of inherent rank to it. So a good example of this for the Arts Education Data Project is we often will say where these schools are located or where the students attend in terms of what county they're in or what district they're in or what school they're in. And you can put those in an order. I'm not saying that there's no order to them. You could put them alphabetically or you could put them geographically, but there's not anything inherently better or worse or ordered about that. Knowing that a school starts with a B instead of a D doesn't tell you any of the inherent properties about that school. It's just an ordering system. On the other hand, ordinal data does have an inherent ordering to it. So you see the example here with this type of scale, which is very common in survey research. So if you give somebody these response options, disagree, neutral, agree, we would all say that that is the proper order. I mean, you could put agree, neutral, disagree, but they're going to go in that same order every time. Or it might be, how much did you like this course? Didn't like it at all. It was okay. Liked it a lot. That would be another example of ordinal data where it goes in a specific order as opposed to, the ranking order. There's something, I'm trying to say this in a different way, that there's meaning in the order that you put them in. Knowing something about that was ranked in this position as opposed to this position tells you something, whereas the alphabet, that doesn't tell you anything about the school just because it happened to fall that way alphabetically. So actually,
there's a ranking, there's like a hierarchy. This thing is over here and it indicates this because it is over here. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I asked you to give me a question related to the arts education, you can interpret that however you want it in terms of students, courses, whatever number of disciplines, that would give you a nominal result. What might an example of a question be?
It would have to be something that's not data we could use. So like, what's your favorite color? Or where do you go to school? Or
What
God.
district you're in, possibly? Like
What?
what district you belong to,
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
or school district, yeah.
Yeah, it could even just be which courses did you take last semester or which arts courses are you enrolled in? So you'd get a list of courses that might still be meaningful information, but there's no inherent order. There's a but coming here. No inherent order to a listing of courses unless they're sequenced. So sometimes there are a specific ordinal ranking to when students take particular courses. You don't take level 7 art until you've taken level 6, until you've taken 5, and so on. So again, it depends a little bit on the specific way you ask the question and what your answers could be. But generally speaking, I'd say course names are ordinal, or what district they're in, or anything along those lines. Even which instruments do you play could just be a nominal response, right? There's nothing inherently better about the flute versus the clarinet. They're both instruments. How about an ordinal example?
I suppose a group of students could be asked, what did you find most valuable in this course? And they could rank things 1 to 5, or what was the hardest project and rank them. Or I enjoyed this project, and then students could say, agree, disagree. So student data usually collects a lot of that so that you can design the next course.
Yeah, if you did ask the numeric question, would we still be getting qualitative responses? If you said to rank
No,
these
for
1 to
sure.
10.
Yeah. I would need to know what was your favorite part of this class, and maybe whether it's an open-ended or it's a you have these 3 options of responses, put them in the order that you feel. Yeah, it would still have to come back to me in words.
Correct. Yeah, could be something just like you described. This was my most favorite, it was okay, or my least favorite, right? Those are qualitative. They have an inherent order that would work just right. Good examples. Okay, so then the last concept I want to talk about is this idea of granularity, or you might hear it referred to as the level of detail of the data or the grain of the data. We use this a lot in the Arts Education project because it really determines what we're able to do with the data. You can think of it as, what does one row or one record in this data set represent? And a couple of examples here. So here's a very, very basic table where we're looking at the number of students at each of these schools. So the grain of our table here would be the school level. And there's lots of things we can say about schools, right? We know where they're located, we know who the principal is, we know what district it falls in, we know their enrollment rates, we know graduation rates. A lot of things are school level, but we can't do very much with talking about the students in that school. All we know is how many students there are. We would need a more granular table or more granular data to be able to say more things about the students in the schools, or even about the courses in the school. We would have to get a table at the course level of grain to be able to say how many students are in each of these different arts courses and which discipline the course fell in, and was it offered for a full semester, or I'm sorry, the full year, or just a semester at a time. So those are all characteristics of the course that we would need at the course grain that you couldn't see at a school level table. Or down even more granular, we start getting into student level characteristics where we actually have specific students listed. Usually not by name, we don't tend to get de-identified IDs of some sort, but same idea. We could know what grade that student is, what is their gender, what is their race, ethnicity, are they eligible for free reduced price lunch? Lots of things we can do with student level data that you just can't do with data that's been pre-aggregated. So you might think of it as kind of this continuum from aggregated to granular, and information and data can fall anywhere along that spectrum. Or you might think of it as a pyramid. Maybe aggregated data is kind of at the top, it's really narrow and limited. And as you get more and more granular, we're coming down the base of the pyramid. And usually that means taller tables, more data elements in it, wider, and just more that can be done with. I'll give you a couple of examples in just a minute. So go back to our original example here. The grain of this table, would you say this is a school level table? See some head shaking. No, we know more detail than that, right? We do know which school. I gave it to you in the descriptive form. It's not actually on the page, but we know what school it is, but that's not the same thing. We know more in depth than that. We know some information about what grade students are in. So is this a grade level table?
Yes, but it's still more advanced than that.
It is more granular than that. I can tell you not just about the 4th graders and the 5th graders, but also I know some things about their gender, and I know some things about their proficiency. But is it actually student level data?
It's not listing out each specific student and more information about that student. So it's still lumping groups of students.
Correct. It's not as granular as student level. I don't know who these 2 4th grade females are who scored below basic. I know there were 2 of them, but I don't know who the 2 were. So not quite student level. So you can do some things with aggregated data, but you can't do the full analysis on it that you might want to with really granular data. Usually the problem we encounter is that the table is not granular enough. Sometimes it can go the other way though. Maybe your question wasn't about the 4th grade females. Maybe you just wanted to know about the 4th graders, but this is the table that you found. And if those totals weren't in here, you would need to do some work to aggregate the data yourself to get to the level that you're looking for. So in that example, you would want to add up say your question was what proportion of fourth graders were proficient, at least proficient on this test. You'd want to add up the females, the females who were proficient and advanced, add up the males, divide them by the total number of fourth graders to get your rate of fourth graders who are proficient. So sometimes your table is more granular than you need, and you do have to do a little bit of analysis to aggregate it. Usually the problem's the other direction though. So a couple of specific examples from the Arts Education Data Project. This is not Washington data, but it is real data from one of our participating states. So we could look at two concepts together, like the number of students that we have in a school, or the number of students that we have and the number of teachers, arts teachers that we have. And if we're looking at that at a very, very aggregated level, the state level, we only have the one data point, and there's really not much we can say about this. We can't talk about a relationship between those two things. All we can say is here are the two numbers. But if we start getting more granular and break this down to the county level, now we have 87 data points, each of them plotted where the intersection of the number of teachers and students meets. And now we can start to see a relationship here. We have, if you were to draw an imaginary line that shows the trend of this data, you'd see it's a pretty strong positive relationship where the more teachers we have, the more students we have, or the other way, the more students we have, the more teachers we have. And so now we can start to say something about the relationship between these two concepts because we have more granular data. And if we get even more granular yet into the district level, now we have over 300 data points. And now we actually start to see a separate trend emerge. We've got this sharper, steeper line for this set of districts. And then we've got this more gradual trend for these other ones, where these ones have a really strong relationship between teachers and students. And these ones have a positive relationship, but it's not quite as steep and strong. We never could have seen that at the county level. You can only see some of these more nuances when your data is sufficiently granular. Now we can go deeper yet. Let's start looking at the school level. Now we have over 1,000 data points, but now we can bring in additional information at the school level, like the number of different arts disciplines these schools offer that you couldn't do at the district level. It just doesn't make any sense. A district doesn't offer a count of disciplines, the school does. It wouldn't make any sense at the county level either. And so now we still have our same two positive trends, but now you can see additional patterns in here. So maybe what stood out to you is what stands out to me, that these schools where they offer a lot of disciplines tend to be the schools where they also have a lot of students, which makes sense. Now there are some down in here, so it's not that only the schools with a lot of students offer a lot of arts, but that is a pattern. And these are things and questions that you can answer and trends you can see and information that you can glean from these displays that are only possible when you have that granular of data that you can't see if it's been pre-aggregated. And then back to that continuum idea, we have, the more aggregated down through to the most granular. So this term is a really important one, especially in the Arts Education Data Project. And it's really important because a lot of the questions that people have about arts education can be answered with very granular student level data. And unfortunately, we don't have as much of that as we would like in the project. So people want to know things like this. What does that arts enrollment rate look like for Black female students who are English learners? Or maybe it's Hispanic male students who are also eligible for free and reduced price lunch. You can think of any possible combinations of characteristics of your students. And you might want to know, are these students participating in the arts or not? And if you only get the data at the school level, we don't know the answer to that. You really need to see that at the student level. Or they want to know things about the different types of and combinations of courses that their students are taking. Are the students who are enrolled in maybe advanced math courses also in music or in other arts discipline? That's a really interesting question that we won't be able to answer and can't answer unless we have the specific student level record to see what that student is taking and look at all the students in math and all the students in music and see if there's a relationship there. Or to be able to follow the same students over time. This is something we're so excited about doing with this project. Are the seniors who are in the arts, what proportion of them have been in the arts all through their school career? Or how many freshmen who took the arts are still in the arts by the time they get to be a senior? Those are really important questions that we can only do if we have the student level record in each year and know that this student ID in year 1 is the same as this student ID in year 4 to see that trajectory for those students. But wow, how powerful of analyses we can do when we do have that granular of data. Or I kind of gave this example earlier. We can look at some of the outcomes for these students. So not just their arts participation, but how does that relate to other things they might be doing? Do they have high scores on their achievement test? Do they have a high attendance rate? Do they graduate on time at a higher rate than students who are not in the arts? All of these are things that arts advocates and people who are really supportive of the arts would love to be able to say about their student population to help get interested and make this, get support and make the case for why the arts are so important. Not that these are the only reasons the arts are important. I personally, as a former art student, believe that art for the sake of art is also important, but funders really like stuff like this. And so it's really great to be able to have these outcome data to be able to speak to those things. So this is what we covered today. And I'm sure some of this was a recap and a review for you, and that's great that hopefully you, if nothing else, gained a little bit of confidence in this, or maybe just refresh your memory on some of these terms. But we talked about some of those important skills and what it means to have some of these data literacy skills. What does that look like in practice when you see a table of numbers? We talked about some of the formats the data come in and the ways we can get it. Again, mostly records and administrative data for this particular project. We talked a little about quantitative versus qualitative data and the ordered versus the nominal. And then we talked a bit about data granularity because it's key to what we do with this project. We can only answer questions that can be supported by the data that we have. And some of the questions that people have cannot be supported by aggregated data. So really looking forward to a time when more and more states, I guess, recognize the power of the granular data and are able to get data sharing agreements in place to be able to share that with us so that we can answer more of those really important questions. So if you want to learn a little bit more and are so inclined to spend a few more minutes on this, I highly recommend this 10-minute video. It's from Arizona State University and Crash Course. They combined forces to put together, I think they have 14 videos or something like that. And they're all really good. And they're usually pretty brief. She really gives great examples, describes things really well, talks about some of the terms of data like mean, median, and mode that maybe you haven't used in a while, but I want a refresher on those. Also just talks about this idea of having skill in data literacy. She does tend to talk on the fast side, so you might want to adjust your playback settings and set that to 0.9 or 0.75 or whatever works for you, or watch it a couple times if you want. But yeah, if you're looking for a little bit more information about this or just kind of want a refresher before our next session on Friday, I do really recommend this series. They're really great. They've done a nice job with them. Good production value too. And with that, that is the conclusion of our intro session together. And like I said, session 2 will be all about charts and graphs. We'll actually look at several examples of different chart types and talk about what types of data they're best suited for and when to use them, as well as how to interpret them. And I'm looking forward to that with y'all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for walking us through like the intro of data literacy. And thank you to those that attended and those that are watching on video. Please join us at our next session